Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. One of the major problems with the Sith was their tendency to murder, pillage, and stab each other in the back. They also are quite shoddy at keeping records and passing knowledge from one generation to another. The Sith were never really able to take over the galaxy because of this very naturally occurring character flaw that almost all of them had. This is why Darth Bane did what he did when he tricked the Brotherhood of Darkness to go hide in a cave and blow themselves up. He knew that having too many Sith in the galaxy was a big problem, but he also destroyed a lot of knowledge and information with this event. Now, after the destruction of the Sith, the Jedi carefully collected all the Sith artifacts they could find, destroying many of them while storing others in hidden compartments within the Jedi archives. The Jedi Temple, after all, is many things: the headquarters of the Jedi, a training facility, a place of worship, and also a prison of ideas and dangerous things. Ironically, the Jedi Temple probably housed one of the most complete and also dangerous collections of Sith artifacts and weapons by the time of the Clone Wars. And when Emperor Palpatine rightfully took his place at the head of the Galactic Empire, he had carefully kicked out the last tenants of the building and built a nice palace within the confines of the Jedi Temple, so that he could freely study Sith manuscripts and holocrons without venturing too far away from his throne. Now, one of the first things that Palpatine did was build a series of observatories that were facing the unknown region of the galaxy. He probably actually started these installations when he was still just a Chancellor of the Republic. These observatories served two purposes. One, they held all sorts of cool Sith artifacts, weapons, and even live specimens. And two, these observatories were used to look into the unknown region and serve as a base for droids and probes that were trying to map out the entire area's hyperspace lanes. The unknown region was notoriously difficult to map. Normal hyperspace lanes throughout the galaxy were quite stable and would not change for thousands of years. But in the unknown region, given the high amount of unstable gravitational anomalies and wandering black holes, the hyperspace lanes were not only short but also very dangerous. Ships essentially had to micro-jump from system to system to avoid getting destroyed. This meant that only locals living within the unknown region really understood how to get from place to place. And even then, the various species within the unknown region lacked the commerce and communication that the rest of the galaxy had, because it was still ridiculously hard and dangerous to travel around. Now, part of the reason why Palpatine wanted to focus on the Outer Rim and the unknown region was that in case of his death, his contingency plan would involve the most loyal Imperial officers traveling to the unknown region and establishing a new empire. They would wait and build up their strength for generations and eventually return to the Republic space and take over once again. Knowing Palpatine, he also planned on somehow coming back to life and leading that army, which is why we might actually see Palpatine return in Episode 9. But the other thing that Palpatine mentioned from time to time to his closest advisors was that he sensed some dark force, some origin of the dark side in the unknown region, which is really one of the other major reasons why he has interest in this part of the galaxy. Now, I'd initially thought that this was Snoke, the all-powerful being from the unknown region that would go on to save the First Order and guide them through the horrors of the area. Then the Thrawn novels hinted it could be the terrifying Grisk species, a nomadic race that would one day threaten the Empire. But I believe that what Emperor Palpatine is sensing is something more primal, almost like a wellspring of the dark side. In Legends, of course, that sense of horror that Palpatine felt was actually the Yuzhang invasion from another galaxy, but that is no longer canon. Now, the Sith have a very special relationship with the unknown region. It's kind of like their birthplace. Since the beginning, when the first Jedi were caught practicing the dark arts and banished, they had always headed away from crowded Republic space, to areas where the Jedi's rule could no longer reach them. Legends say that 6,900 years before the Battle of Yavin, the first 12 Jedi exiles who survived the 100-year darkness were banished to the unknown region. The Republic wanted to execute them, but the Jedi metaphorically wanted them to go to their rooms and think about what they did, and spared them. The world that the Dark Jedi arrived on was called Korriban, and the Jedi apparently forgot to check if there was life to be exploited on the planet. There was, and they were called the Sith. Not the Sith Order, but the Sith species. These were red humanoids with tiny face tentacles. And luckily for the Dark Jedi, they were one of the few species that had a natural affinity with the dark side of the Force. The Sith King, or Sithari, a term that would later be adopted by the Sith Order, decided to welcome the Dark Jedi to his world as honored guests. The Sith were still kind of primitive and in awe of their technology and command of the Force. The Dark Jedi would naturally overthrow this king and eventually took over the entire world. The Sith, while skilled in using the Force, did not have the same type of training that the Dark Jedi had access to. The most powerful of the Dark Jedi became the first Dark Lord of the Sith, and the exiles started interbreeding with the Sith. Generations later, the first Sith Empire had been established and enjoyed almost 2,000 years of expansion and prosperity outside the view of the Republic. While the Jedi exiles were far more powerful than even the most powerful Sith sorcerers on the planet, the primitive Sith species had been around for almost 100,000 years, and although they never created large civilizations that were capable of passing down knowledge and training, they had extremely complex and well-developed Sith magic, alchemy, and sorcery that the Jedi exiles had never seen. And so the two opposing sides began teaching and learning from each other and created a very nurturing environment for the dark side arts. By the time of Palpatine, many of these dark side techniques had already been lost. Now, somewhere around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, two Republic explorers who were looking for new hyperspace lanes stumbled onto Korriban. They were hoping to open up the region for new trade and connection to the Republic and profit from it. The Sith Lords, however, had no interest in such things and immediately arrested the two individuals as spies. The Sith had more or less forgotten about the Republic, so finding these explorers presented a new opportunity and new territories to expand to. A Sith leader by the name of Naga Shadow had taken over control of the Sith Council after creating a false flag Republic attack. He would lead the Sith in its first great conflict with the Republic, known as the Great Hyperspace War. Although initially able to take the Republic by surprise, his offensive was eventually turned around by Empress Tita of Koros Major. By the time Naga Shadow returned home defeated, he finds his rival and fellow Sith Ludo Kresh waiting with a fleet to destroy him. This would be known as the First Battle of Korriban. This was the kind of infighting that would ultimately doom the Sith time and time again, as Shadow and Kresh's forces were destroying what was left of the Sith defense fleet. Empress Tata arrived with the Republic fleet and wiped the Sith Empire out. Republic and Sith historians debate on what happened next, but generally this period of time is described as the Sith Genocide. Republic forces decimated the Sith species and hunted down dark side Force users across the Outer Rim and Unknown Region. Treasure troves of Sith artifacts and Sith knowledge were lost with the scouring of Korriban, although some of the most interesting items were taken by Republic scholars back to the rest of the galaxy. The former homeworld of the Sith, Korriban, was more or less abandoned aside from a few small groups of survivors of the war. Ultimately, this vacuum in power within the Sith leadership led to the rise of a very evil and very, very powerful Sith Lord known as Lord Vitiate. He took the remaining Sith and their knowledge further into the Unknown Region to a former colony of the Sith Empire known as Dromund Kaas. Now, at this point, it should be noted, as powerful as Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious were, they were simply responsible for recovering ancient Sith techniques like midichlorian manipulations and creating life with the Force. The ancient Jedi had once practiced some pretty advanced Force techniques in alchemy. For instance, one skill that the Jedi had was that they were able to animate flesh and use pieces of flesh to plug out gaping wounds in the body. When the Jedi became the more strict and rigid Jedi Order and turned away from the dark side, this was when we begin seeing a loss of knowledge. Still, what remains of the old Sith Empire in the Outer Rim and the Unknown Region still remains the best place for scholars to go to find Sith artifacts. As violent as evil as the Sith could be, they had no limitations on how one could study the Force and learn from it. Now, on the new Sith Empire world of Dromund Kaas, Lord Vitiate, who had achieved immortality through a crazy Sith ritual, slowly began planning the downfall of the Republic. This time by using Mandalorian people as his proxy to attack the Republic, which in turn militarized the Jedi Order, which in turn led to many Jedi turning to the dark side. It was a brilliant move by Lord Vitiate. While many Sith factions rose and fell within view of the Republic and the Jedi Order, the hidden Sith Empire of Lord Vitiate was the true threat, and only one individual by the name of Revan knew about it. Revan had been one of the Jedi that had turned to the dark side and led a Sith fleet against the Republic, but then turned back to the light side. He alone remembered the ancient hidden threat in the Unknown Region, and soon after his redemption, left the Republic to go find it. 300 years after he disappeared into the Unknown Region and more than 1,000 years in hiding, the immortal Sith Empire finally unleashes his assault on the Republic. And as usual, Republic forces were completely unprepared and the Outer Rim was taken within weeks. And the initial Sith onslaught does not halt until well into the Mid-Rim, around the planet of Batu. At the same time, the Mandalorians unite once again and start attacking Republic trade routes and shipping lanes. Using a negotiation with the Republic on Alderaan as a distraction, Sith forces take Coruscant, sack the Jedi Temple, forcing the Republic to agree to the Treaty of Coruscant, which recognized the Sith Empire as a legitimate government for the first time in the history of the Republic. The Sith retained control of thousands of former Republic worlds, and the two sides settled down for a long Cold War. Ultimately, this cycle would continue to repeat itself. New Sith factions would arise, the Sith Emperor would start a new faction known as the Internal Empire and wage war against the rest of the galaxy, and with every generation of Jedi, a handful would turn to the dark side and rebel against the Jedi Order. The fight between dark and light would continue, and even though we are told that Darth Bane managed to destroy all the Sith during the Battle of Ruusan, I'm almost certain that deep within the unknown region there are still Sith colonies, Sith tribes, and maybe even Sith kingdoms waiting and planning to once again return to the galaxy and take over. Because after all, there's a lot of room to hide in space. Anyway guys, let me know what you think. Is there some kind of hidden Sith threat in the Outer Rim or unknown region? Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual guys, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.